I will forego the reading of the bios and just introduce the speakers. Our first speaker is Barry Finger, who will speak on public sector workers under crisis. Our next speaker is Ann Jaclard on why practice needs to follow from theory and the importance of getting theory right. And Fred Moseley is the third speaker on a lost decade for jobs in the U.S. unless ... Okay. So without further ado, we can start with Barry.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. What I want to discuss in this presentation is why we are entering into an age of pervasive public austerity. In this, I will be basing my presentation on the essay posted on the website and which will appear in the upcoming winter 2011 issue of New Politics. I qualify my discussion by limiting my remarks about public austerity to Western capitalism, because it is here that significant concessions had been previously extracted from the ruling class, often at the epic cost of struggle and war. It is the fruits of these past victories that are now under assault by capitalism. In Europe, austerity is being imposed by the EU and the IMF, but this imposition has been met by a mobilized working class in Greece, Spain, Belgium, and France, hell-bent on defending their livelihoods and social advances. Where this attack on the public sector takes a notably American cast, as distinct from Europe, is that the American ruling class has captured the political narrative and enlisted a huge swath of its own workforce as a battering ram against these gains. The Tea Party is the extreme ramification of this narrative, and its sentiments resonate within broad sections of the white working class. I want to first examine the economic background to the current crisis and investigate how we, as socialists, can approach the problems of capital accumulation, to understand the laws that govern capital formation, and why this particular crisis has come to signal a comprehensive employer's offensive against the last remnants of the welfare state safety net, and the public sector workers largely unionized to administer these programs. Finally, I want to suggest a few proposals, if I have the time, for what I believe to be a realistic starting point for working class resistance that addresses the immediate needs of the working class without descending into a fantasy world in which the American working class is seething with revolutionary passions held only, and I emphasize the word only, in check by reactionary union bureaucracies and the Democratic Party. This is not to deny that unions as they are presently constituted in the Democratic Party are major impediments to socialism and to independent working class struggle. But it is the lack of a distinct working class consciousness, a failure to make the elementary distinction between them and us of income derived from work and income derived from property ownership that is the distinctive hallmark of the American working class. It is this failing to simplify broadly that permits it to succumb so readily to capitalist political leadership. Building a revolutionary movement requires first raising a perspective of real working class solidarity and helping to shape a program relentlessly around that perspective. This is the precondition, in my opinion, to moving the discussion to the left, because it is a standpoint that introduces a momentum fundamentally inconsistent with working class subordination to capitalist politics. The approach outlined here derives from the recognition that all economy is finally reducible to the economy of time. All class relations in the end constitute varying means of expropriating the material surpluses of the productive classes by those who possess a monopoly over the conditional means of work. That is, all class societies are based on the division of the working day between the need to replenish the capacity to work, necessary labor time, and that over and above necessary labor time, which can be appropriated by the socially dominant class, the surplus worker time. Where that line is drawn under capitalism is determined not physiologically, but sociologically, through the interaction of parameters created by productivity change and class struggle. Value theory is an instrument for the analysis of capital accumulation that centers social conflicts in terms of exploitation. Changes in productivity, in output per unit of labor time, make possible in turn changes in time relations between the labor required to sustain and reproduce workers and the surplus labor time available to capital in the form of additional exchange value realized in profits. But changes in productivity require investment decisions that necessitate plowing back capitalized surplus value into the system as labor-saving innovations. The material connections that regulate the accumulation process derive from this. At the most basic level, this process is fraught with difficulties insofar as increasing labor productivity requires producing more commodities with less labor per unit of capital invested. Substituting, in other words, capital for labor. The rate of profit tends to fall because ever less living labor, which is the source of profits, comes to be activated by each additional unit of capital. The massive profits emanating from the relative decline of living labor can therefore only increase if capital accumulates at a sufficient pace to offset that reduction. Because the falling rate of profit is a developmental tendency imminent to capitalism, it situates both business expansion as well as crisis in terms of the rate of accumulation. As long as a rapid pace of accumulation is sustainable, the crisis tendencies of the law can be neutralized by the expansion of profits. This is not a negation of the law itself, but an expression of how crisis tendencies of the law are kept in abeyance, preventing the relative overproduction of capital from turning into an absolute overproduction. And indeed, there is a close fit between this law theory and the actual trends in the American economy. According to the May 2006 survey of current business, the rate of profit for non-financial capital averaged 11.8% from 1960 to 69, 8.8% from 1970 to 79, 8.1% from 1980 to 89. There was some improvement in the decades of the 90s to 9.1%, but never a resumption of the 1960s, and then a return to the decline in the first half of the current decade to 8.4%. And if the remainder of the decade were averaged in, this would surely trend much lower. The end of business expansion results only when social conditions exclude a sufficient increase of surplus value for a further expansion of capital, or when the expansion of capital has reached a point beyond which any further accumulation would lead to the same or less surplus value than before. This leads to the convulsive process through which the temporary barriers to renewed accumulation can be removed. Mass unemployment places downward pressure on wages. Portions of capital are demobilized, permitting capital values to be written off as a precursor to a more efficient, leaner structural organization. Massive political pressure is exerted against public spending in order to reclaim profits otherwise earmarked for taxation, and thereby sacrificed to the accumulation process. Conversely, there is virtually no pressure exerted by capital against military spending, law enforcement, or intelligence gathering, because these costs are accepted as a needed sacrifice to maintain a domestic and international framework favorable to private investment. While unemployment forcibly drives down living standards below the value of labor power, it also ramps up the intensity of work. A diminished activated working class is forced to generate output previously produced by a larger complement of labor. This has the dual impact of increasing the unpaid portion of the working day while increasing the amount of exchange value generated in that unpaid portion, insofar as the increase in the intensity of work is uncompensated by a proportionate rise in real wages. There is no such thing, however, as a generic capitalist crisis. If we wish to analyze the concrete form of this crisis, through which the general tendency of the crisis asserts itself, we need to examine the disturbances in the reproduction process that the hypertrophic growth of the financial sector has imposed on the system. For this structural departure drives the relation of capital formation with surplus value in a new and debilitating direction that mainstream ideologues are belonging to. The much discussed, but in my opinion, little understood financialization of capitalism signifies capital's attempt to flee from the perils of productive investment, from which there is in fact no real escape. A capitalism without accumulation is unsustainable. Yet this period has been characterized by banking, insurance, and futures trading becoming the growth industries. Endless portfolio rebalancing came to preoccupy the wizards of Wall Street. From 1973 to 85, the financial sector never earned more than 16% of domestic corporate profits. In 1986, that figure reached 19%. In the 1990s, it oscillated between 21 and 30%, higher than it had been in any part of the post-war period. This decade, it reached at its peak 41%. And this growth coincided with a relative shrinking of the industrial base and its rate of growth, coincided, that is, as cause coincides with effect. This is not a casino economy, but a fundamentally risk-averse capitalism. What financialization did was to transform the relationship between Wall Street and the real economy from symbiotic to parasitic. Instead of recycling idle balances of surplus value back to those sectors of the real economy where profit potential was identified, the financial system neutralized these balances by transforming these surpluses into ever new financial instruments for additional risk aversion. It first created junk bonds to cannibalize firms. It securitized mortgages to diffuse risk. It created new forms of risk hedging. It created financial insurance policies. This internal recycling of capital within the financial sector continuously leached first from the productive sector, permitted a growth in asset value not justified by a parallel increase in surplus value. Wall Street had, like Mel Brooks' producers, Bialystok and Bloom, massively overissued claims on future profits that were simply unsustainable in light of the flagging rate of accumulation and productivity growth, which the financialization of the economy itself massively contributed to. This was all papered over by a frenzy of unsustainable credit-bloated consumption, which again sucked profits out of production and channeled them back into the financial sector. By bailing out the financial sector through the TARP program, the state placed a floor on the value of these overissued claims, securing investors at taxpayers' expense. Equally important, this resurrection failed to rebalance capitalism and return the financial system to its proper role as an adjunct to the process of capital rather than asset accumulation, asset deflation being a precursor to and a precondition of industrial restructuring. It therefore left the system vulnerable to additional bouts of crises caused by a deficiency in the rate of accumulation arising from this very disproportionality. Restructuring now would require an industrial program that the ruling class will simply not impose upon itself. The urgent search for new sources of capital accumulation therefore increasingly depend and take a turn towards dismantling the state sector, whose costs, as I will try to elaborate, are seen as uniquely reclaimable because of their political vulnerability. The upshot of this is that any real program for the defense of working class living standards can only operate against reestablishing the conditions of capitalist recovery. To attain the massive cuts in state spending and working class living standards necessary to restore profit rates, the ruling class needs to face a divided working class and to break those remaining pockets of working class resistance that offer a fighting alternative. This is always an issue in an economic recovery, ramified, however, by the very depth of this, the worst recession in 75 years. Liberal economists deny this. They point out that deficit spending, the borrowing of unused liquidity to prime the pump of economic activity, has a multiplier effect on income which can reverse an economic downturn and change the shape of capitalist crises. Paul Krugman and others attribute the anemic showing of the Obama program not to a fault in the theory, but to the insufficiency of the undertaking. This is key. Unless profit expansion resulting from the economic stimulus can be shown to exceed the input of funds withdrawn from the private sector to prime the pump, the entire undertaking makes no sense from the point of view of capital accumulation, whatever the scale of the operation. Incomes and employment can expand and capitalism can be stabilized, but only within the context of a state that has grown at the expense of the private sector. This is precisely what the business community fears. To them, this would be a pseudo-prosperity. Today, the government sector accounts for almost 45% of GDP. By government sector, I mean the entire government sector, state and local. Up 33% from just a decade ago, with most of the gains coming on the heels of the stimulus package. But only that recovery driven by the resumption of profitability, in which the expansion of demand is driven not by state purchases, but by the process of actual renewed capital formation. Only that type of recovery is a recovery that capitalism can have confidence in, and this is precisely what the state cannot offer. In the current crisis, it has become increasingly obvious where the larger fault lines are beginning to break. The New York Times breathlessly intones of nothing less than a, quote, class war over public pensions, fomented by a private sector to enlist their employees against public workers. Unlike past battles against government workers, this is taking a forthright bipartisan tone. Andrew Cuomo, for all his liberal pretensions, promises to engage against public workers, much like his New Jersey neighbor, Chris Christie. As Minnesota governor and GOP presidential hopeful Tim Pawlenty told Politico, if you inform the public and workers in the private sector about the inflated compensation packages of public employees, and then you remind the taxpayers that they're footing the bill, they get on the reform train pretty quickly. Behind this assault is the very real recognition that the public sector now has the highest concentration of unionized workers in the American economy. Public sector unions are the de facto face of labor today and the last bastions of union power. They are effectively the front line against dismantling state services, including the return flow of services that constitute what's left of the safety net. The payment of unemployment insurance, food stamps, disability pensions, housing subsidies, Social Security and Medicare, that is entitlements for those whose capital is thrown out of work, sickened, marginalized, or has no further use for, are therefore the victorious fruits of past labor struggles. They are the use values that democracy created. These values, these victories, have always been subject to slander by right-wing demagogues maliciously playing off the employed against the forcibly idle. Welfare has been transformed under the previous Democratic administration from an entitlement to a time-limited forced work program. By public sector or state workers, I simply mean government workers. State and local workers comprise 17 million of 20 million civilian government workers, the rest are federal employees. State and local crises are largely attributed to excesses in workers' pay and benefit. On the federal level, the public debt crisis is not a crisis of pay and benefits, but of entitlements. That is, on the federal level, the cost of maintaining a working class as it ages out of employment or otherwise sheds its commodity character, that has lost its usefulness to capital, is considered the source of the projected crisis. The difference in the character of the so-called crisis between the two sectors of the government, state and local and federal, is one between operating costs and government and program costs. The combinations of the two is what is meant by runaway government spending. Now, there are fundamental differences between private and public sector workers that the right seeks to exploit. But the most important thing is that in good times, the sacrifice of surplus value to the state can be tolerated for social peace, just as long as there are sufficient profits to expand both the public and the private spheres. In bad times, there is an opportunity for capital to make common cause with its own working class, a working class hard-pressed by the threat of unemployment, declining wages, home foreclosures, debt peonages, and to shrink the scope of the state whose tax burden is a supplemental source of working class distress. Middle class liberal leadership, the traditional conduit between the working class and the ruling class, has long discredited itself as a political, social blind alley for realistic working class politics. Middle class privileges may be palpably threatened by the scope of the crisis. Working class incomes, working class security have come under active siege. The crisis cannot and will not be resolved on the backs of the middle class. Their conditions of existence provide no steady source of social discontent and therefore no continuous source of struggle from which a larger political program of resistance can emerge. It has become increasingly clear that a middle-class liberalism that participated in the elimination of welfare, industrial deregulation, and that encouraged the outsourcing and export of industrial jobs, as well as the continued bailout of Wall Street, is not available as a springboard for working class content. Because of this, confidence in the two-party system to address the crisis has dramatically eroded. This liberalism is no longer a factor in fight back, and this can only be turned around if the left is willing to take the initiative to define and clarify the true dimensions of the crisis. And it can only do this by means of a clear class struggle program that places these dimensions in proper context. In this, there are lessons to be learned from the scapegoating of public workers. First, the working class needs immediate and significant relief from taxation. When the right raises this demand, it is being both demagogic and self-serving. Their real purpose in raising this demand is not tax relief for workers. It is to reinforce the every man for himself mindset of social atomization that reaction thrives on. In so doing, the ruling class hopes to increase their accumulation fund without sacrificing the extravagant personal consumption that has become their unchallenged class entitlement. It is only by capitalizing on the desperation of hard-pressed working people, the desperation born in the first instance by capitalism, that the demand for working class tax relief becomes an exercise in misdirection. Second, socialists should turn the attack on public sector workers inside out. The left should resurrect the demand that the government act as the employer of last resort, that any worker should be eligible to participate in the advantages, such as they are, of public employment. Why restrict these jobs, as liberals are so fond of doing, to shovel-ready or even green jobs? This is simply too restrictive. Such qualifications preclude from public employment those who cannot perform heavy labor or are otherwise unfit for industrial employment. But more important, this restriction overlooks the vast inventory of unmet social needs that extends beyond the physical infrastructure neglected by a system long characterized as one of public squalor. Such needs are readily identifiable: community and housing services, child care, public health, legal advocacy, public transportation, etc. This necessarily requires deficit spending and massive revenue sharing with the states where government jobs are. But it drives this need not in terms of saving capitalism, but in terms of a concrete program of working class communal amelioration. The political significance of this is that it subordinates the necessity of deficit spending to working class struggle and cohesion without assuming direct responsibility for the capitalist crisis. To take responsibility is to cap the movement at its knees. But these are not socialist demands. The working class as it's constituted is not ready or receptive to socialist demands. The point is to change the conversation by introducing a left voice, and in so doing raise a perspective that cannot and will not be raised by the existing political parties. It is the perspective of real working class solidarity.
Thank you, Gary. The next speaker is Anne.
Hi. Am I close enough to this thing?
No.
How's that? Is that good?
No.
How's that? Is that good? Yeah. Okay, I'll shout. My paper is called Why Practice Needs to Follow from Theory and the Importance of Getting Theory Right. Everyone seems to agree that we're in for some rough times ahead. Likely another recession, continuing high rates of unemployment, austerity, harmful consequences to the economy from increasing debt, and political assaults by the right on working people, women, African Americans, and Latinos. I will argue that the left has an obligation when advocating what to do, not to just repeat old formulas without examination, not to wing it, not to experiment, to play with people's lives. What we advocate as left practice, I contend, should follow from what we've worked out theoretically. And we need intense theoretical work in order to figure out what is best to do. In addition to the obvious things, like defending workers' jobs, incomes, and homes, that's sort of a no-brainer that you go out and do that. But other practice follows from theory, or all practice follows from theory. So getting theory right first before we start advocating policies will not slow us down, but rather will speed up our making good selections of what to advocate. Selections not based on quick fixes, but on what has a real chance to make substantial and sustainable change in people's lives. I argue that, quote, doing theory is an urgent action to take. The left is hardly close to resolving the theoretic questions that the crisis raised, including what caused it, can crises be prevented in the future by reforming capitalism, and is there a viable alternative economic system that would be better for working people? Instead of pursuing these debates and attempts to work out ideas to their conclusion, many leftists are now trying shortcuts to get to plans for action and abandoning attempts to get theory straight. I contend that in this rush to conclusions, the left may well render itself irrelevant, because we first need a clear understanding of what went wrong in order to know what could constitute a solution. Specifically, we're faced with the question of whether reforming capitalism can prevent similar crises from recurring, or whether reforms are just temporary palliatives. But you may ask, why does practice need to follow from theory? Why can't we work on one sometimes and the other at other times? And the answer is that all practice flows from some theory or another, even if it's not articulated as theory. Things like, everybody knows that, is, I think, a dangerous notion. Saying everybody knows that is not making claims on saying that's not making claims on a particular theory is a trap that keeps us from examining the ideas in contention. It keeps us repeating only what is familiar, either historically or the ideas of the ruling class or the dominant ideas on the left, whose record in making permanent change is pretty bad. So I'm arguing that it's vitally important to get our theoretical analyses straight and not just to select what we like based on whatever comes out of our own heads or hearts. If you needed surgery, you would want a surgeon who knew exactly how to perform it, not one who just had a general impression of what a well body looks like. Yet when it comes to changing the socioeconomic system of the world, people tend to think that they don't have to be so careful as they would be in choosing a surgeon. They act as if deciding what to do is just a matter of opinion. Some people even say one idea is as good as the next. Let's see what works. Now I'm going to look briefly at a couple of contending theoretical explanations for the condition of the economy and ask, what are the implications for action of each of these theories? Now, I'm not doing this in order to argue for my personal favorite, although I have a personal favorite, but I'm doing it to try to illustrate the different policies and decisions about what to do are linked to and depend on different theories, so that actions can't be fruitfully discussed abstractly, disassociated from their theoretical bases. One hot debate lately has been whether the fundamental underlying cause of the crisis resides in a problem within the whole economy, including a persistently low rate of profit, or whether the fundamental underlying cause lies in just the real estate and financial sectors accompanied by, quote, neoliberal policy. Not only mainstream and liberal economists, but also some Marxist economists argue that finance has largely become uncoupled from the productive economy. It acts independently of it. This group regards financial sector problems as the fundamental and independent cause of the current crisis. Some of the Marxists who argue this, such as French economists Gérard Dumenil, Dominique Levy, and Michel Husson, also claim that there was a generally rising rate of profit prior to this recession. On the other side, people such as Andrew Kliman, Michael Roberts, and Chris Harman put forward evidence that the rate of profit has been persistently low for decades. Such findings lead to the conclusion that the financial sector problems themselves resulted from low or falling profitability and other problems in the productive economy. The two views obviously have very different consequences for selecting what policies to advocate that people take up. Now, how do the first guys, mostly using the very same U.S. government sources for data as the second group, how do they find that the rate of profit has risen? A primary reason is their use of what they call a current cost rate of profit, which actually is not a rate of profit at all. Marx and the bourgeoisie share the concept of a rate of profit as a relation between initial investment and profit. Using the initial investment or capital advance produces a historical cost or actual rate of profit. What certain Marxist economists, including the first group I named, do instead is to use something called current cost, which is what the capital advance would cost at the time that the profit is made. This rewriting of the actual investment using current costs tends to make the profit rate seem to rise, but it has little relation to any useful rate of profit. Capitalists want to know the rate of return they've really gotten. The problem underlying this difference is a larger one, the economist theoretic framework, and that's beyond the scope of this paper. The debate over the uncoupling of the financial sector from the rest of the economy is hardly new. Since the beginning of the last century, some such as Hobson, Hilferding, and Kautsky argued that financial capitalism was a new and distinct stage of capitalism, one that operates according to different laws than does the capitalism Marx described. The current contours of the debate go back at least to 1986, when a management professor, Peter F. Drucker, published an article in Foreign Affairs describing the changed world economy of that time, and his conclusion that many formerly linked factors had become decoupled. Employment decoupled from production, profits from productive investment, industrial production from the economy as a whole. A few months later, the Marxist-Humanist philosopher Raya Dunayevskaya critiqued Drucker's conclusions of an uncoupled economy, and she counterposed Paul Marx's theory that the antagonism between capital and labor is the fundamental characteristic of capitalism, which no change in its phenomenal manifestations can change. And she said, quote, "The grand illusion that all capitalist ideologues have created about this nuclear world and its robotized production was achieved by them through forgetting that alienated labor is the irreplaceable foundation, essence, and universal form, the creator of all values and surplus values. That is exactly what produces both capitalist profits and what Marx called the, quote, general absolute law of capitalist accumulation, its unemployed army." And you can read her entire remarks. MHI published them in a booklet on the persistent fall in the falling rate and profit. It's the appendix, and that's for sale outside. Now, Dunayevskaya did not have the statistics available that show the rate of profit had fallen and remained low since the late 1970s. But now we have 30 years experience of it. Several decades of a low rate suggest that capitalism is in big trouble and will not get out of trouble without a recovery in the rate of profit. That's possible. A low rate of profit means that many companies are on the edge of bankruptcy and they're failing to attract investment. So they are actually unable to pay their workers more without going under. The low rate of profit thus makes future crises more likely unless and until it recovers. Those who insist that the rate of profit was rising for decades before the recession tend also to embrace the idea that, quote, neoliberalism was controlling economic conditions in some kind of new way. I believe they mistake a time of free market capitalist ideology for a whole new stage of capitalism, one that revived capitalism's strength and stability, as if a political phenomenon, neoliberalism, created super profits in a new way from financial transactions rather than from workers' surplus labor. But the figures show that squeezing the workers via neoliberal policies did not in fact cause the rate of profit to rise in the U.S. in any sustained manner. Therefore, capitalism has not proved triumphant nor invincible. It proved to have the worst crisis since the Great Depression. If neoliberalism is not a new stage of capitalism, then the term is essentially a political designation for an increase in privatization, deregulation, decrease in government services, etc. In that case, we face a very different task than the task assigned themselves by those who attribute the crisis to neoliberalism or finance or both. Our first new task would be to rethink the tendency to put forth explanations based on essentially political phenomena like neoliberalism as a substitute for explanations rooted in economic theory. The use of neoliberalism as an economic concept rather than just an ideological and political one assumes, without saying so, that politics is in control. That is, that a capitalist ideology or particular policy determines economic relations rather than the capitalist system itself determining relations. If that is your theory, then you're going to wind up advocating for the political manipulation of existing society, thinking you can control economic conditions through politics. The opposite theory, that an economic system is in control, leads you down a very different road because it tells you that political manipulations are constrained by the basic laws of capitalism and have limited effects. Now, I'm completely opposed to restricting discussion of theoretical explanations to the intellectuals and having a separate, quote, practical practice based on something else that is assumed to be more palatable and understandable by the non-intellectuals. I think that can only result in misleading workers and activists into spending all their time and energy on campaigns that do not serve our long-term interests. So while supporting working people fighting for their jobs, homes, wages, and civil rights, we would not be helping them if we failed also to explain why such victories are temporary. Capital's reaction to workers' victories will be to try to push them back. They will maybe followed by continued unemployment, deflation that lowers real wages and such. People need to understand the reasons for this and be prepared for continuous struggles as long as capitalism exists. I'm in favor of telling the people I fight alongside that I believe the only lasting solution that won't be just a quick fix until the next big crisis is to replace the capitalist system. It would be deluding people to act as if capitalism can be made to serve their interests in the long term, whether by nationalization of industries or regulation, whether by formation of cooperatives as islands in the sea of capitalism, doesn't work, or by redistribution of wealth or any of the other plans. But this also entails a lot of theoretical work because we also need to explain what capitalism could be replaced with, and not to leave socialism as a slogan or abstraction, nor to foster another illusion that breaking with the law of value, the heart of capitalism, that breaking with it and creating a new mode of production are easy tasks. They're certainly not. You need to theorize them now. My organization, Marxist-Humanist Initiative, sees the contribution that the left could make at this moment in history to be to demonstrate theoretically that another non-capitalist world is possible. We are encouraged to learn that people all over the world are studying Marx again because we think his theory is vital to this task. But developing an effective response to the economic crisis and its effect on the basis of his theories is a huge challenge, one that only begins with understanding the crisis. First we got to understand capitalism, then we got to figure out just what must be uprooted in order to have socialism. In order to put theory back on the left's agenda, Marxist-Humanist Initiative has proposed to establish an international network for the circulation of theoretical struggles. Sorry the name's so long, but it says what it's about. Network for the circulation of theoretical struggle could aid the left to prepare for what may happen and to prepare to respond effectively. Let me stress that we do not expect those who participate to adopt our views and tasks. It's not the network's purpose to select a political philosophy, but rather to foster engagement among all contending theories. We hope to change the orientation of the left away from the idea that just more and more activity and more organization are all that's needed, and to get serious about the need to debate until we work out theory. This does not mean adopting political positions, but rather digging deep through engagement with each other into the ideas underlying the views of the crisis and what should be done. In sum, thought determines activity, even if the actors don't always recognize that their assumptions and even their spontaneous rebellions are based in theories. In order to contribute to the fight against capitalism, we need to examine what theories are contending and what their ramifications are. Wide-ranging dialogue is key, not only so that all views can be heard, but above all so that we can test different ideas in debate and work out answers to the questions we face. Doing theory is hard but vital work, not something to do on the side after you've done all your, quote, activity of supporting strikes and picket lines. Doing theory is an action too, and it's one that's vitally needed now. So I invite you all to sign up for the network for the circulation of theoretical struggle. There are some sign-up sheets outside on the table to the left. We expect that the network will bring together individuals in reading groups and related projects and all other interested people so that we can engage in dialogue, provide mutual assistance, and share information. The network will supplement, not replace, the activity that's already taking place and that we all hope will take place. The network will not have a political or theoretical line. It will be open to all who share its goals, participate in it, and abide by the procedures and rules that it sets for itself. And all participants will have equal voice and vote on principle. One of the first projects of the network will be to establish a website that will provide a forum for dialogue, as well as an archive of articles, readings, and links. Because we want the network to facilitate dialogue and mutual assistance and not just be a source of information, use of the website will be limited to active participants in the network, and our working definition so far of an active participant is someone who engages with what others say and write. Those who just express their own views or publicize what they've written are not actively participating in the project. So we need people to work on this and to support it financially. Please get involved.
Thank you, Ann. Our final speaker is Fred Moseley.
The subject of my presentation is the very high rates of unemployment that the U.S. economy is suffering from today and will be in the years ahead, and I will try to estimate just how bad it's going to be. And my main conclusion is the title, that the next decade is very likely to be a quote, lost decade for jobs for U.S. workers with double-digit rates of unemployment as far as the eye can see. So this will be the kind of economic conditions that workers and we will be faced with, and the conditions, the context within which struggles and strategies and discussions will take place. I'll also close with some preliminary remarks about what should be done about these very high rates of unemployment. So my talk is mainly description. It's a little odd maybe that it's coming here at the very end, but I hope the details will be useful. This is the well-known official rates of unemployment. And you can see that this is the, as you know, the highest rate of unemployment, except for the early 1980s. 82 it reached a peak of 10.8. But what's striking about the early 80s was how rapidly the rate of unemployment came down. And I will argue that nothing like that is going to happen this time around. And the only reason why the official rate of unemployment is not already above 10% is that the official estimates of the labor force, right, the rate of unemployment is the ratio of the unemployed to the labor force, the denominator there, the rate of the official labor force does not include workers who've given up looking for work. Right? It only counts those who are actively seeking work. And it kind of puts those who've given up into a separate category called discouraged workers. Right? The official labor force has not increased at all since the beginning of the recession in late 2007. In fact, it's even declined about 1%. So if the labor force just had grown normally since the recession began, the rate of unemployment now would be around 12%, rather than a little under 10%. Another reason why the official rate of unemployment is an underestimate is there's no distinction between part-time jobs and full-time jobs, and if you're working at least 5 hours a week, a job is a job is a job. This shows you how much the involuntary part-time work has increased in the current recession. So in response to criticisms about the underestimate of the rate of unemployment, the government in recent years has started to publish alternative estimates of the rate of unemployment that counts these two categories, the discouraged workers and the involuntary part-time workers. These estimates are shown in the middle graph here. The red line is the official rate, so-called U3. The middle gray line is the rate of unemployment and underemployment if you include discouraged workers and involuntary part-time workers. You can see that's up to around 17% today. Now, the top line is an unofficial estimate of the rate of unemployment that comes from a website called Shadow Stats, put together by a group of people who argue that every government statistic ever put out is a lie. The particular lie in the case of unemployment is that, I didn't know this myself until recently, was that during the Clinton administration, good old Bill, they changed the definition of discouraged workers, right? So that after 1 year, right, and if you're still a discouraged worker, you're dropped, right? It's like disappeared. And you're no longer even included in this expanded definition, right? So Mr. Shadow Stats adds those in, and he comes to an estimate of about 23%. Unemployed, including those deleted, discouraged workers. So roughly a quarter of the labor force today, and the worst is yet to come. We can also do a demographic breakdown. You're probably familiar with this. Very high rates of unemployment in teenagers and 20-somethings. And the other thing about the 20-somethings is that a lot of them have dropped out of the labor force. And so if you factor that in, the rate of unemployment of early 20s and even late 20s is more like 20%. Of course, African Americans and Latinos have above average, these are official rates of unemployment, and they're underestimates not only for the reasons I already gave, but also because the labor force estimates are based on the U.S. Census, the 10-year census, and minority groups are notoriously underrepresented in those censuses, especially inner city, likely to be unemployed minority members. So it's a serious problem. I mean, there's already depression in minority inner cities. This is teenage unemployment, 20-somethings again. This graph, I think, is maybe the most alarming of all. This shows, as you can see, the percent job losses in all the post-World War II recessions. And so for each recession, on the vertical axis there, it starts 0.0 is the peak employment before the downturn, right? And then the vertical axis shows the percentage, the kind of cumulative month by month percentage decline from the peak at the beginning of the recession. And then the horizontal axis is the number of months from the beginning of the recession. The red line is, of course, the current recession. The peak of employment was December '07. We can see that in the beginning that was a fairly mild, slow decline, but then a much steeper descent as the recession continued. Overall, the total decline was about 6%, and that's a total of a little under 8.5 million jobs lost. This 6% decline was, as you can see, obviously the largest decline of all the post-war recessions. Before that, the biggest decline was the blue line, which is the late 40s, but you can see also how rapidly that recovered. And again, that is definitely not going to happen this time around. And in general, the earlier post-war recessions, even though some of them were fairly deep, recovered fairly quickly, right? But now if, for example, in 1980 and 81, the yellow line, this was the double dip recession in the early 80s that resulted in a 10.8 rate of unemployment. This was obviously fairly brief. And then the purple line is the 81, 82 double dip, second dip. And even that was not as severe as some of the other downturns. So we can get some idea of what a double dip recession would result this time around. But now let's look at the most recent, the two most recent besides the current one. The black line is the early 90s, right? And the brown line is the early 2000s, right? You can see both of those were fairly mild. I mean, they're universally described as mild recessions, right? And the loss of jobs was not that significant. But what's noteworthy about those recessions was how slow the recovery was, right? And in the early 90s, it took 30 months to return to the peak employment. In 2001, it took, as you can see, 46, 47 months. These recoveries were widely described as quote, jobless recoveries. Heard that phrase. Now, there are two main causes that are usually described of these more recent jobless recoveries. In the first place, the GDP, the economy, the output itself was slower to recover than in previous recessions. But even more important was the business emphasis on cutting costs, labor costs, by any means possible. And I think it's safe to say that both of those causes of jobless recoveries are still very much with us today. And in fact, I just read an article recently that was entitled "The Mother of All Jobless Recoveries." So then, a little exercise that will give us some idea about the years ahead is to try to estimate how long it will take to at least to recover the 8.5 million jobs that were lost, to get back to 0 point. And so here are some various possible scenarios and assumptions. The top line there, since the jobs started to increase in January of this year, through September, the rate of increase was roughly, has been roughly 70,000 a year. If that snail's pace continues, it will take 10 years to just return to the previous peak before at the beginning of the recession, right? And that doesn't do anything for the growth of the young workers that have entered the labor force or would like to enter the labor force and seek employment. So that would be, into 2020, and the rate of unemployment at that time, if this trend were to continue, would still be almost 15%, assuming a normal growth of the labor force. Yesterday, actually, yesterday's report was somewhat contradictory. There are two surveys for the employment and unemployment. The rate of unemployment data that I started with are based on a survey of households. And those estimates yesterday showed, as you probably heard, 9.6 stayed the same, right? But if you look closely, you realize that labor force declined yet another month, and the employment actually declined, according to the household survey. These data for employment are based on a survey of businesses, and yesterday's report was somewhat better, according to this business survey, and the monthly increase for the month of October was 150,000. Right, so that was, so very contradictory reports in these two surveys, and you can't make too much emphasis on 1 month. But that would bring the average so far in this recovery up to about 90,000. Right, the second line is if we estimate that in the months and years ahead, the average monthly increase is 100,000 jobs a month, then it's going to take 7 years just to get back to the previous peak. And the rate of unemployment then in 2017 would still be almost double digits, and these are the official rates. Then if by some miracle the rate of the job increase were to accelerate to double that, 200,000. By the way, the 100,000 was just about what the previous two jobless recoveries were, right? I think a little less, 93,000. But if jobs were to accelerate, then it would still take 3 years, 3.5 years, and we would still have almost double-digit rates of unemployment. And that seems very unlikely to me, and that's the most optimistic scenario. The economy is slowing down, not speeding up. So I think 100,000 a month is really about the best we can hope for. The Wall Street Journal, this comes from the Wall Street Journal, back a year or so ago, tried to estimate how long it would take to get back to the previous, to recover the lost jobs. And they estimated, you can see December 2016. This is based on a rate of increase in jobs equal to the last 2 recessions. Just for a little humorous relief, these are the Obama administration forecasts. This one was in April 2009. This was when they were voting on the stimulus package, right? And so this was their estimate of without the recovery plan, the rate of unemployment would go all the way up to 9%. And then, but with the stimulus plan, it would peak at a little under 8%, right? And then both come down. And then, but what they were showing here is the actual in the several months since the original forecast, which was already exceeding what the rate of unemployment would be without the recovery plan. This is the more recent forecast. More recent forecast in February of 2010. And you can see they're projecting, that there's going to be steady and rapid improvement and decline in the rate of unemployment down to 5-6% within 3 or 4 years. In other words, this looks very much like the early 80s. Right? That's what they're projecting, and that is a dream. So I guess I'm running out of time here, but my conclusion obviously is that long-term unemployment is going to be a very serious problem in the U.S. economy and for U.S. workers. The 2010s, I think, are shaping up to be a lost decade. Some people are already calling it an age of joblessness. This next graph shows unemployment over 26 weeks and how that is now, well, it doesn't show, but it's approximately 40% of total unemployment is now long-term unemployment. That doesn't include discouraged workers and deleted discouraged workers. So if we added those, it would be more like 2/3 long-term unemployment. And you know the serious negative consequences of long-term unemployment, and that percentage will go higher in the months ahead as double-digit unemployment persists. So I mean, the next decade is certainly going to feel like a Great Depression for the majority of workers. Long-term unemployment insurance is going to be a very important issue for these workers. You may have heard about the 99ers, the people who exhausted the 99 weeks of unemployment, extended federal unemployment benefits. Now they are actually organizing themselves in various ways. This is a website called Jobless Unite. This is the organizer, Donna Lee King. She worked for, guess what, a mortgage company in San Diego. She was laid off 2 years ago. She claims she has applied for 3,000 jobs. And she's very angry at people who say she's a lazy deadbeat because she can't find a job. And she's trying to do something about it. She's organizing. It's not exactly your prototypical working class radical, but her life has really been destroyed. And you know, and you read the websites, you know, and the personal stories. I mean, people have spent their savings, they spent their child's college money, they've lost their home, they've lost their job, and they're desperate. And they're starting a bit to organize. One thing, I mean, this is a, you know, do a little web surfing here, and you can really get an idea of the problems that are facing. This NYC 99er rally back in August, some of you may have been there. It's got some very powerful videos, not only of the rally, but of just how desperate it is for a lot of people out there. What are these people going to do? What actions are they going to do? How are they going to salvage their lives? There's an article in the New York Times recently about older workers in their 50s, right, who've been out 2 or 3 years, you know, and they're starting to wonder, will I ever get a job again? Right? With no savings, no nothing. You know, and my answer, I'm afraid, is probably not. Right? I mean, I think it's going to be that serious. So long-term unemployment benefits, that's what they're fighting for. You know, they say job or benefits, right? That's going to be an important issue. And just to call your attention for political purposes, a more immediate issue is the federal extended benefits, right? Did you know, expire November 30th, right? So it's going to take a bill, right, of this Congress to extend benefits beyond November 30th, right? And if that doesn't happen, right, the default is determinants, right? And you would have 2 million people immediately lose their benefits, right, at the 1st of December, and then you would have another 3 or 4 million lose their benefits in the months to come as the state unemployment runs out. Well, you know, the obvious next question is what's to be done, and reform or revolution. I mean, we've been talking about that in a sense all day. Maybe I'll get a chance in the discussion. I mean, I think that a full to support those who are pushing for a full employment bill right now would be a very valuable political action and strategy. Jobs is going to be the issue, right? And even though, you know, we can express our skepticism and our limits of this, I think that's what people are going to be concerned about. Right? And plus tax the rich to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Again, the floor is open for comments or questions. And as before, I'll call on 3 or 4 speakers at a time and ask each one to keep the remarks to 3 minutes. Speakers. Yes, I'll first ask for people who have not spoken in the previous round. It doesn't exclude others coming after that. Seeing none, Bertel. Oh, I should call on a couple of people first, as I said. Then second here, and then third, Andrew.
I'd like to address some comments to Fred's remarks. I'd like to address some comments to Fred's remarks. I think it's useful to deal with the kind of problems that you point to in explaining the amount of employment we have as a process which is still unfolding, and see whether those particular elements that you introduced are likely to stay the same or to get worse, and if worse, if they're likely to get much more worse, and if there's any likelihood in the foreseeable future of them ever being turned around. Because it's one thing to talk about 10 and 15 and even 20% continuing, but what about 25, 30 and more percent coming to be in the not-too-distant future? Not only because those processes that you listed are likely to get worse, especially in the time when the Republicans have the kind of power that they do in the government, but because of a certain number of processes which I think are terribly important, which you did mention, at least not here. I'm thinking of not just automation, but the robotization part of automation, which is rapidly developing, and which means that whatever new investment is going to occur is going to require fewer new hires, because they'll have machines which can produce more of whatever kind of widget they think they can sell profitably, and hire only a few workers. And then those few workers, as you point out, are likely to be, those jobs are likely to be outsourced to other countries. So I think that that we have to look more closely at not just automation as a static factor, but as a developing one in an age when robotization is moving along very, very quickly and is going to take up a lot of those jobs. Aside from robotization, I think also worth mentioning is the coming trade war, which has been declared a few days ago in the form of the currency war, started by Bernanke, where he has obviously stirred a hornet's nest, not just in China, but throughout the world, who are now going to be in a position of having to sell, or if they don't do anything about it, having to sell many of their still valuable resources to people who coming in with this machine-made money that Bernanke has created for the banking sector. So, and that's going to create, again, problems which are going to result in still fewer jobs. So I think the situation, as bad as it is likely to get much, much worse, and that very, very quickly. And I'm not sure whether we may not be looking at something that no one has mentioned, at least the words haven't been mentioned, and that this may be the final crisis of capitalism. I know Marx didn't believe that there was going to be one, but maybe we have to, because of all these factors which have come into play at a time of climate change, at a time of the kind of weaponry that exists for world wars, and that we may not have the time, not we personally, but our species may not have the time to be around for still another crisis after this one, which may go on for a very, very long time.
My name is Blair. I'll just explain. I'm the president of a local union that actually represents workers at the Department of Labor in the state of Connecticut. And just anecdotally, really quickly, there was a short period when the extended benefits did run out, and the anger of the people that came, now, people have to realize now when you get unemployment benefits, it's all done by telephone. You know, they don't want the, the public to be, get able to get at these workers anymore. So, but the unemployed still come to the so-called job centers because they think they can get something done if they go talk to someone. But, and our members felt so threatened by these people that the Labor Department put police officers in all the job centers to protect us from the angry public. given what Fred just spoke about and Barry, I mean, one thing that certainly I've been advocating within our own union, which is AFSCME, is that, you know, we do have to build solidarity, because if we don't have that, you know, our own benefits are through, our pensions and everything else we have. So it was very good to hear your perspective sort of on what to do, but clearly those of us that are left in the U.S. labor movement, to me, that's got to be what we have to do. And the old strategies of the past of just defending our pensions, you know, our wages, I try to convince my fellow members it's a dead end, because they're not going to be salvageable. And although I agree that capitalism is what we have to get rid of, unlike some of the other speakers, I think there's certainly some intermediate steps we have to take right away, or we're never going to get there. Thanks.
Andrew was next.
One brief comment and one brief question. I think two important things that have been said this afternoon are first by Intosh, who pinpointed the issue of anti-Semitism in regards to, you know, blaming the bankers and stuff, and Jaclard, who pointed out that this idea of financialized capitalism and stuff goes back to Hobson, goes back to Hilferding, and so forth. And I think that what we're starting to it's becoming clearer to me that there are really two approaches. One to oppose capitalism, and one to sort of give into some populist sentiment that we're seeing, which scares the hell out of me, which, you know, goes to opposing the bankers and the rich, and there's always the word JEW, I think, behind the scenes of a lot of that. Now, my question for Fred is, look, as Jaclard said, it's a no-brainer that people need jobs, that they should fight for jobs. I mean, we all accept that. But what you said is we should support the people, you know, who are proposing jobs bills or something in Congress. Why can you not just say we need jobs? Why do you have to alienate your powers and say, gee, instead of we, working people, have to take control of our own lives, what we should do is get ourselves behind some certain politician and have them, you know, represent us. Okay? I think that was the mistake that happened in the 30s in a big way. So why can't you just say people need jobs, instead of what we should do is be supporting those people who are putting forward jobs bills? You can support even the content of the bill without supporting the people. Why do you put it like that?
Well, our procedure, we should ask the different speakers to respond if they would. So could you all take 3 minutes if you wish to respond at this time?
Well, I'm not sure what question I'd like to respond to. As far as bridging the gap between government workers and private sector workers, I think that we have to do this by raising two demands and lashing them together. The two demands being a significant reduction of taxes on workers, let the ruling class pay for its own recovery, and a massive expansion of public sector employment as employer of the last resort. This at least separates the antagonistic behavior that they've been essentially been tied to by the rise of the radical right, which is used this as a battering ram against the state. Now, I'm under no particular delusion that the bureaucratization of capital will come about as a result of expanded public sector employment in and of itself is a tremendous victory, but is a qualified victory. It would be a qualified theory, insofar as it would entail a compromise forced upon capitalism by a working class gaining in confidence and social vision under circumstances most conducive to further unionization. And it carries within it the momentum to drive labor's own existence beyond the confines imposed upon it by the profit system. In that sense, I think these demands allow us to intervene in a meaningful way in struggles that are going on. There are struggles. The 99ers, there are rank and filers, there are businesses that are constantly closing, there are beleaguered government workers who are losing their jobs. All of these places are fertile ground for us to try to unite these two sectors of the working class by these two types of demands. At least it's a chance to make our voice relevant.
Fred,
Yes. Okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, the fact that things are so bad, as we've just heard from the other two speakers in this session, it does not mean that therefore all we must do is intensify activity. Just to come back to my thing, the fact that things are so bad means it's an opportunity for us to talk with the workers about what can be changed and how it might be changed in order to transcend the limitations of capitalism, which have become so evident that we're limping along from crisis to crisis. So I again make my plea for getting our theory straight before we simply plunge into activity. We can do both. We can go out and picket, etc. Talk to people about the need for jobs, but we should not limit our activity to that. And I want to come to this question then about stagifying. I'm hearing a certain discouragement. People who say, oh, we're so far away from revolution. It's so discouraging. We have so much to do. We have to start slow. We have to tell the workers simple things first. I don't think that's how it works. I think that you don't know what's going to set off people to get radicalized and to get interested in throwing off the whole system. Was it Connolly, right? The Irish revolutionary who said revolution's never practical until the moment of revolution, and then nothing else is practical. So I think that has to be our perspective. But we don't have a lot of time, as Bertel was saying. We could be headed towards fascism, we could be headed towards annihilation. All kinds of things are going on. So we have to get serious about talking about an alternative to capitalism, as well as what, as I said before, seems like a no-brainer, talking about the need for jobs and income and homes and that sort of thing. I'm sorry that Fred didn't say more about how he thinks the demands for jobs and telling people the truth about capitalism should be handled, because in his abstract he did say that he thought we should be truthful with people, but at the same time we should tell them that they should devote themselves to these reforms. And I saw a bit of a contradiction there, so I'm hoping we can get into that a little more.
Great.
Andrew, I mean, maybe I misspoke, but what you seem to misinterpret me. I didn't say support the politicians, right? I said support what I intended to say, at least, was to support the movements, people who are pushing for some type of full employment bill, and everybody kind of responded to and to try to make those movements more of an explicitly class movement, right? And particularly by raising the issue of taxing capitalists in order to pay for it, right? That this, this insist that working people deserve and demand, as they are demanding, productive employment, and tax the capitalists who have plenty of wealth to pay for it. And I think, that's not to say, I'm not saying we should go out and say this is what you should do. Right? I'm saying if people are doing that, I think that's a useful struggle, and that at least they are being active. And if we can kind of make that more of an explicitly class movement, and then it will be obvious. I mean, it's probably, that kind of movement is probably not going to succeed, right? But it will be obvious in the process that it hasn't succeeded because of the strong opposition of the capitalists, right? And then, it would be more apparent to all that capitalists are the enemy, right? And maybe then be pushed in a more radical direction. But I think that's the hottest starting point, right? Is jobs and employment. I mean, I think that's what people are now desperate about and will be increasingly desperate about. If what they're at least willing to get started on doing is this kind of demand for full employment, then we should support that with our own critical position. Very tall. Just quickly, yes. I mean, I gave my projections were the optimistic scenario, right? It was assuming no double-dip recession, and just a slow recovery, right? So no, but I think a double-dip is very likely, and that things will be worse than I projected, right? And then the response will be all the more kind of urgent. So I didn't mean to suggest that this is going to be, a long, slow, but generally positive upward trend. I think that's the optimistic scenario. And the robotization, right? Out of time.
You got another chance.
Okay.
We have time for about 4 or 5 more speakers, so and then before our panel sums up. Yes, I don't see your name. Sam first. Second, woman in the back there. Third, Paul. Fourth, Joseph. Fifth, Roslyn.
It has been said earlier that the task of pro-revolutionaries is to raise consciousness. I wonder how you raise consciousness by advocating a bill for full employment. What are you actually saying when you do that? Are you saying this is possible in capitalism because crisis is caused by parasitic bankers? I think in the best case you create illusions, you hide reality, but in the worst case you actually prepare the road for protectionism, for pitting workers from one nation against another, and possibly open prepare the road to war. I think that there is the same problem with this demand of taxing the rich. Today, it's true that the United States has more leeway than other countries, but today all capitalist countries have to compete as a destination for capital, and their taxing policies are quite dependent from that. The vision behind this is again that what has to be done is a redistribution of surplus value instead of ending value. There is this idea of a gradual takeover of the existing institutions of capitalism, from unions to banks to prisons to you name it, and we'll call that socialism. And I think you all underestimate how destructive and transformative the revolutionary process actually will have to be. Thank you.
Thanks. Mine is going to be quite short. Pardon? Hamid Hussein. The recent figures show that we spent about $2.5 billion a day in Afghanistan, whereas China spends the same amount in making investments in Afghanistan. So my number one question is, how could this kind of imperialism be stopped overseas? And following from overseas, and following that, and by implication, my question is, what kind of concrete, short and long-term political strategies can we envision so that we can overcome this crisis?
Andrew said the no-brainer position is to demand jobs. I want to agree with Zander that the brainer position is to take account of the actual state of affairs. As Barry Finger explained very well, the private economy is unable to provide jobs, and as Fred explained, in fact, there will be increasing unemployment. And also the public sector will have to cut jobs and pay the people who remain in the public sector even less. It seems to me if there is anything that people who want to be left should be doing, it's to say the truth to people and to say that the future is unemployment. This does not mean that there's nothing for people to look for or think for. They don't simply have to accept misery. But it means that people have to ask for something realistic. They have to ask for food, they have to ask for shelter, they have to ask for health. There is lots of stuff in the world that they can take and use. And the demands have to be now to actually take command of and take hold of the physical resources for survival, which already exist in the earth, rather than to try to get people to ask for something completely impossible, which is more jobs.
And getting the resources is easier?
At least it's possible. The food exists, you can take it and eat it. But the job does not exist and it will not exist, so you can't have it.
What is the food?
I'm going to say something that might be a bit controversial. The reason why there exists the federal extended benefits, the reason why the already intense attacks on public workers and other workers in this country have not been even more intense than they have been, is precisely because this country is spending $2.5 billion to occupy Afghanistan and many, many more billions of dollars to occupy elsewhere around the world. Barry said that the way that the demands that he's proposing should be financed is through deficit spending. I would submit that the only reason why any leftist in any country, but particularly in this country, could have the illusion that deficit spending is a way to finance anything in a situation of economic crisis is precisely because we live in a country where who's going to collect that debt? Which capitalists are going to gang up and send gunboats into New York Harbor to make sure that the US Treasury debt is paid promptly and on time and at a higher rate of interest? Now, ultimately, they will attempt to exact punishment, and they already are. If you look at the budget for the MTA right here in our city, we don't even know how much of that is being paid as interest on all the past debts that were contracted by the MTA. So local government debt and national government debt are significant issues that are not going to be able to buy us out of the the capitalist crisis. The very fact of their existence is predicated upon an imperialist world order in which the US is temporarily dominant, but it rests upon such things as the overall decline of the physical infrastructure, the non-investment in passing, paper claims to wealth, fictitious capital that embodies that rundown of the physical infrastructure. It's based on things such as the shift of manufacturing southward within this country and overseas to such places as China and so forth. So, the answer is not going to be deficit spending, and it's not going to be taxing the rich. It has to be fundamentally confiscatory. If we repudiate the debt to the banks, then maybe we can begin to get somewhere within the framework of the value form. But that's only a temporary solution. They will counterattack as they must. And that, again, at the risk of repeating myself, is why internationally the working class has to organize for state power. If I can shoehorn in a final point. Barry, you said that the working class is not ready for socialist demands. In part, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think also in part it's because the elephant in the room that we haven't been talking about, which is why is it that so many workers in the United States lack even elementary class consciousness, has to do with racism, has to do with the doctrine of white supremacy that has historically conditioned the development of the US working class. And if we don't confront that head on, we're not going to get anywhere, and we barely talked about it today.
There have been a couple of allusions to the horrible situation that we are confronting, and I really would like to request that we all focus on the immediate crisis as a crisis, and I want to thank Fred Moseley for his presentation on the unemployment crisis, and Barry Finger on the history and the crisis as it's affecting the attack on public employees and government. And so I'd like to invite people to think in terms of, if the bombs are about to fall, right, what's the best thing to do to head that off from happening? And in terms of doing the no-brainers like supporting a movement for full employment and so forth, where is that movement for full employment? I was very happy to see Fred's put up on the board one particular website of people who were trying to do something, and the 99ers. But where is this vast movement that we're supposed to support, the strikes that we're supposed to support, and so on? So when I propose that we support full employment, which I'm very happy to hear Barry and Fred also supporting, it's very discouraging to hear people say, well, yeah, but, that's a no-brainer. In the meantime, where are the brains behind trying to organize something like that to get people out and doing something? The first people who are going to be attacked are the most vulnerable. It's going to be the elderly. It's going to be the people who need help the most. Are they going to just go out and take the food that they need? I mean, where is this movement going to come from? It's going to come from people telling people to just go out and take what they need? I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's going to be it. But the danger is, as we've seen in the 30s, that there will be people presenting answers. More austerity, attack the people who aren't working, attack the people who need, attack the people who are sucking us dry with their big pensions, attack the people on Medicare. So, I mean, unless we're ready to fight back, it's easy to say, yeah, let's support the fight back. But who's organizing the fight back? Well, who's organizing is the right-wing Tea Party people. So anyway, that's my comment.
Actually, thank you. We have time for about 2 more speakers from the floor. So, well, you'll have your few minutes.
I know.
Yes. Blue shirt, right?
Yeah.
Is there a second speaker who hasn't spoken?
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
No.
Okay. Well, I asked everybody else to hold the mic, so it's only fair I do. So I'm most of the people here, well, many of the people here share the same common background of having been active in many different social and political movements, unions, and so on and so forth. Still elected fellow of the speaker from Connecticut. I'm a retired elected officer as a teacher in the city colleges in Chicago. This is just my latest experience. But one of the things that this afternoon in this panel makes it very clear in my mind is we're in the unfolding stages of a major crisis such as we haven't seen in generations. It's only beginning. And I think that the question of the importance of theoretical questions has never been clearer to me, anyway. That this question of the banks, someone spoke about in Chicago, the Republic windows. Yeah. So I was involved in that and went to the demonstrations and outside the plant and talked to the workers there. And it was very clear that it capitalized on a tremendous resentment for the bailout for the banks. In fact, it was a very smart political move that was tied into that, and that's what enabled them to get the public support that really crowded out into the streets and shut LaSalle Street down for a while. And so it's playing into it and building on it, right? But now this question that's been brought up here about the banks, is it really the banks are out of control? For some people meaning Jews, but for others just not necessarily that. So here's a theoretical question. What is the role of banking in capitalism as a system? Is it separable? Is it inseparable? So it seems to me that these are really important questions. When we get involved in these things, the one thing that people of the left can do, whatever we're involved in, is to highlight the organic, living, immediate questions that people bring up in the struggle with a theoretical perspective on it. That if we don't do that, we're going to fall, the best that we can hope for, which it's unreasonable to hope for in my opinion, but the best we can hope for is something like the WPA of the 30s, which also helped to serve to demobilize the working class struggles among the unemployed by giving temporary but real employment with real wages that they could send home and to quiet things down and to meet the needs. Now they looked like gains, but they also were undermining the actual development of the class struggle. Does that mean we shouldn't fight for those things? No, I think that's bullshit. You want to say, oh, we're not going to fight for these gains because they're going to deter you from the real revolutionary struggle is, excuse the language, but it's an asinine way to approach life. But if we can introduce the real theoretical issues that people are getting at without knowing it sometimes by the demands of the popular consciousness, then we can help people to grasp how it is that the dynamics of capital is causing this and opens the door for them to think about solutions systemically.
Thank you, Carl. Further speakers? The woman in the back hasn't spoken.
Okay. Can anyone hear me?
No.
Okay. Louder? Okay. All right. I'll just shout. Well, I'm not really good at public speaking, but I did make some observations today at being at this conference, and that particularly from the perspective of the worker, and the fact that, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong about my observation, but that even amongst the left in this country, the worker tends to be talked about like an object. And if you're poor and you're low income and you're working, you're always an object. And then to hear from the people who are so-called wanting to help you, having to be talked like an object is also not very helpful. The organization that I volunteer with organizes people who are low income and who are working. And they are not the most articulate people, they may not be the most well-educated people. They're people who know their struggles and they know what they need for themselves. And it seems to be, even amongst the left, there's this two-tier of the intellectual and the worker, somewhere down there. And somehow the worker is not smart enough to understand what they need. Somehow the worker is not smart enough to understand how to organize. And I think that needs to be destroyed before we can move ahead. Because it's the worker that we're advised. The worker knows that the politicians don't work for them, the system doesn't work for them, I'm sorry, but the intellectual leftists don't work for them, not in the long run at least, or when things get really tough. And anyone who really knows what it's like to be on welfare, what it's like to get laid off, what it's like to be on public assistance, what it's like to live in a housing project, again, you're an object in this system. And always being talked to and not with or together is disheartening, and it's demoralizing. And it's demoralizing no matter where it comes from, whether it comes from the capitalist or it comes from the leftist, or it comes from the politician, the elitist politician who spends $40 million of their own money. It's like, well, I don't have $40 billion of my own money to spend on a campaign, but I have my voice, I have my experiences, and I have the ability to organize people who are like myself for something that we all need in the long run, everyone, depending on, I mean, no matter what your class is, because none of us here is the ruling class. Even if you are middle class, upper middle class, you're not the ruling class, and you're not the ones who make the decisions. So that's just, correct me if I'm wrong.
Thanks for the speakers from the floor. Now I'll give a few minutes, 4 minutes each to each of the panelists to finish up. Who wishes to go over?
I think there are two questions I'd like to address. The first is Paul's question. And in a certain sense, I'm sorry to answer this. The idea of a socialism that's a do-it-yourself socialism of picking up the flotsam and jetsam that's left over from capitalism as it falls apart, to me is a social program of dumpster diving. It's not a serious program for socialism. And as for my friend from the LRP, I believe, who seems to be somewhat dismissive of struggles that find people where they're actually struggling, on the level that they're actually struggling, and marches 1,000 miles ahead of them in full knowledge that capitalism is a doomed social system that can't be reformed, gives the impression of us socialists as being somewhat detached from the struggles of ordinary people, and also a touch deranged, because we're speaking to ourselves. Nobody is listening. What type of people do that? We either engage in mass struggles where they occur, not because we've chosen them to be that way, but because that's where they are. That's where people are struggling. That's the level on which they're struggling. And we have to engage them where they are, not where we wish they were. So those are mine. And I'm sorry that I presented it that way. I think I have a little bit of difficulty with the argument that revolution is the only solution. Everything, reform is chloroform. I heard that when I was growing up. I don't think it gets us anywhere.
Yes, I mean, I think my kind of ideas are similar to Barry's. I guess a couple of other points. I mean, I think what I would want to emphasize from the get-go in discourse or whatever is the basic human right of productive activity and productive employment that provides a decent standard of living, right? That you know, that is a basic. Every society should provide that, right? And that's what we should demand, right? And I think if people were serious about that, right, there's no way that's going to be satisfied under capitalism, right? But if we just say, you know, and we can say, you know, and I would say, you know, that that's very unlikely in capitalism, right? That socialism is the only way for sustained full employment, right? But not many people are willing to take that road right now, right? And so what at least some people are willing to do is to try to fight for full employment within capitalism, right? But what I find, the little bit of movement there is, you know, and there is Jobs for America Now and so forth, right? But it's all just about the full employment side, right? And I think we're where socialists and activists can play a role is to make that more of a class movement, right? And not just full employment, right? But full employment and tax the rich, right?
I'd say tax capital.
Okay. I'm just being colloquial, but and that I think in the process of doing that, if we're serious about the basic principle of the human right of productive employment, right, and people are going to say, they're not ready to go the revolution route yet, and give capitalism one last chance, right, but we can try to add the class dimension. And who's going to pay for this, right? And that's obviously going to be opposed strongly by capitalists. And then it will, it seems to me, make all the more obvious the conflict of objective interest. And if we're serious about, then people maybe come to their own conclusions, right? If we're serious about a basic human right, productive employment, this is not possible in capitalism because of the opposition to capitalists, and so we got to go a more radical route. I think that's what I would suggest.
Okay. I want to thank, it's Courtney, right, in the back there, for reminding us that workers know perfectly well how bad off they are, and who's not helping them, and who is. And I must make another statement against this view that some people have expressed that the workers are backward, that they can't do anything until we raise their consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. I don't agree with that at all. I think it's been pointed out that they do know what's up, and I think the failure here is with the left to illustrate theoretically that there is an alternative to capitalism, because people aren't going to go out and risk their lives fighting and struggling unless they can see some way to build another society. So I'm not talking about a program, I'm talking about theoretical groundwork that has to be done for how you actually break with value theory, how you actually break with value, how you actually stop producing for value and start producing for need. These are very difficult questions, and that is what I think must be addressed. And the left has failed to address these things, and therefore the left has alienated itself from the working class. I think, Ross, that we can't substitute ourselves and our plans and our thinking what's the most important struggle for what comes from the workers. I'm sure that there are strikes and struggles that we haven't heard about because they don't get publicized or have a website, and I'm even more sure that they're going to be a hell of a lot more very soon. And the question, I think, is will we be ready? Will we be prepared to have intelligent discussions with those workers when they are moving, and not just say rah rah, or worse yet, oh, your strike's very nice, but you really should join this fight for this particular bill in Congress or whatever. No, we have to listen to the workers, we have to work with the workers, and we have to discuss theory with the workers, including what is the opposite of this stupid Braden system. To the woman who said that we have to discuss imperialism, I agree we haven't discussed it much today, if at all, but it's very difficult to know what to say except that it is a product of capitalism, and we're not going to stop war until we get rid of capitalism. As Dostoevsky used to say, the opposite of war is not peace, the opposite of war is doing away with capitalism. I think Paul Mattick's not here anymore, but to say the future is unemployment seems to me to negate the possibility of having a different kind of society. I mean, why should it be? Is it because we've got robots now that can make everything we need, and that's going to happen, and they're going to start giving everybody what they need and nobody's going to have to work anymore, and that's why there's going to be unemployment. No, it's a very, very different reason, and the reason is if the capital can't make a substantial rate of return, they're not going to invest, and they're not going to hire workers. And making a demand for food because there is food, whereas there aren't any jobs, is no solution. I might remind people that during the Great Depression, the farmers in California dumped their abundant fruit and vegetables into the ocean rather than give them away or sell them below cost, because that was the only way they could continue to make a living. So it's a stupid system.
Okay, we finally have one more presentation, the closing remarks by Mike Dola of Marxist-Humanist Initiative. After that, as I said, we have to be out of here by 6 o'clock, but there are lit tables in the, out in the corridor, so please, as you leave, pay attention to them. Now, Mike.
Mike for Mike.
Hello. I was asked to make some quick closing remarks on behalf of MHI, and I don't like speaking in front of people very much. And I thought that everything that I'm going to say is pretty much on the flyer that you should have gotten with the program, and also has been put by Anne already. But then I thought that there's some value to repetition, and remembered that I have an abundance of flyers and papers like stuffed into my program from the 2007 Left Forum program. Maybe taking a few minutes of your time will help impress upon you the importance that we think that this project has. So here we go. We've come to the close of a long day spent discussing our understandings of the crisis and capitalism over the last few years. Speakers and audience members have spoken about the possible consequences of proposals that attempt to reform capitalism and whether these proposals could ultimately meet people's needs. After we all leave here today, those of you who stayed, this discussion must continue to reach many, many more on the left. Excuse the word left, provisionally defined. The Marxist-Humanist Initiative is going to make video of today's panels available on our website within the week. We ask that you all help spread the word about the recording and get what has been said here out to as many people as possible. We've heard from panelists today that this new normal, jobless recoveries, austerity measures, and other regressive policies will be exceedingly painful and drawn out. The left must realize that when faced with the ruptures and opportunities of the last couple of years, the moment calls for more than just simple quantitative intensification of the same organizational activities and protests. We need the organization of thought, and that's why we're here proposing the formation of a network for the circulation of theoretical struggles. I hope everyone has received and taken a look at the proposal flyer. It's a call to anyone interested in seriously examining the many theories of the crisis and digging into the prescriptions that necessarily flow from these theories to get involved now. Wide-ranging dialogue is essential so that all views can have a hearing, but even more so that these views can be tested, debated, and worked out to reach answers to the crucial questions that we face today. As is stated in the proposal, what is needed is not a theory, but the doing of theory. It's a crucial distinction. The point is to work out answers to the questions we face on a rational basis, and this requires critical examination of all ideas, taking nothing for granted. So we envision the NCTS not as a project that will select some particular theory from among the existing alternatives, and certainly not as an opportunity for adherents of different positions to fight to have their positions adopted as the correct one, but as an ongoing collaborative process in which we engage with one another, explore and test ideas, and develop our thinking in order to respond in a rational and effective manner to the new challenges of our times. That's verbatim from the flyer. This doing of theory is collaborative. Crucially, it cannot be something the thinker carries out on his or her own. Theories must be subjected to the critical eyes of others to assess whether or not they hold up to scrutiny and are deemed worthy of being put into practice. Other reading groups and theoretical initiatives are now in existence, and those that have yet to be formed will hopefully see the NCTS as a supplementary body of knowledge that propels and facilitates the working out of our grasp of capitalism, the crisis, and the responses that can come from the left. These may strike some as overly audacious, presumptuous as a proposal. Yet, more than merely audacious is the disproven notion that in a situation of upheaval, theory can be picked up en route to liberation. In the May 1968 Paris mass outburst, a near revolution had erupted in a technologically advanced country. But millions of workers, students, and people throughout France marching in the streets were ultimately thwarted. The general strike was prevented from turning into a social revolution. This was not because of de Gaulle or even the reformist funneling of the French Communist Party, but because relegating the philosophy of liberation to non-committal abstractions and marching without theory leads en route to nowhere. As a young American revolutionary who participated in the '68 Paris revolt said of the defeat afterward, quote, "Going from the possible to the actual is not only a task of the workers, it is a task for theoreticians." And as the young woman said in the back, I don't think that the two are distinguishable. They come from the same place. We hope that the Network for the Circulation of Theoretical Struggles will soon be able to establish a website that will provide a forum for dialogue as well as an archive of articles, readings, and links. We want the network to facilitate dialogue and mutual assistance, not just be a source of information. For this reason, use of the website will be limited to active participants in the NCTS. That is, those who engage with what others say and write, as opposed to those who only wish to disseminate their own views. There's much that still needs to be worked out, and we need your help for this project to be a success. Please consider joining the network now so that we can get things off the ground as soon as possible. Like any other web-hosted, at least initially, resource-intensive endeavor, we are also in need of financial contributions. Please consider a donation to ensure that this project has a chance of establishing a sorely needed space on the left. Donations may be made here tonight and through the MHI website. All such contributions will be used only for the network of circulation of theoretical struggles, and any unused funds will be returned. Thank you very much for your time.